I will call this meeting to order at 7:04 p.m. It's a joint meeting of the Select Board, the Finance Committee, the Capital Planning Committee, the Planning Board, the Conservation Commission, the Board of Assessors, and the Historical Commission. And with that, I will hand off to our Assistant Town Planner, Mariah Kurtz, to lead the evening.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. It's really nice to have a big group of people all talking about the former International Paper Mill. I'm sure all of you have driven by it and wondered what's going on in there. A lot of these pictures were taken by Charlie Zielinski, who's a resident who toured it with us today, or this week, and can kind of give you an idea of the current state of the building. Some of the town officials were able to do a tour last week to also give them an idea of the current state of the property. So the way that this is going to work is I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then I'm going to invite Jessica from the FERCOG to come up and talk a little bit, and anyone from the Select Board or Brian. And then we're going to stay in these small groups, and I have some prompts in your packets of questions to talk about. And then after 10 or 15 minutes, I'll ask if you all want to switch around, and you're welcome to switch tables, or you'll be able to keep talking with people you want to keep talking with. And we'll do that for a while until it seems like we've covered the subjects that we want to cover. And then we'll come back together, and we can all kind of report out what we've all talked about, any kind of directions we think we want to go. And so I will ask in each group if someone can kind of take notes. There's sticky notes and notepads. You can write things down as you go. At the very end, we'll take notes on what we're all kind of reporting out on. And then if you want to bring me sticky notes at the end that kind of have thoughts, you're welcome to do that. I also welcome you all to kind of percolate on your thoughts in the conversations this week and send me an email with anything you've kind of taken away from this. Is it?
I would almost prefer that feedback, not use the mic.
Do you want me to just yell?
Yes.
Can you guys hear me?
Much better.
Okay. Does that work?
That works.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. I thought it was just me, so. Okay. So I just wanted to go over a little bit of the history of the IPMO complex so that you can all get an idea of what we've done so far. It sounds like just talking with people, a lot of you have already read a lot of the information that we've put online, which is really great because there's a lot to read, so it can be hard to kind of digest it all in one sitting. So the complex was originally built in 1902, but if you're looking at any of these pictures, you can tell that not all the buildings were built at once. It was kind of a hodgepodge as time went on and the mill needed more things done. They added on a building. And so all of these buildings were kind of built at different times with different uses. And so there's about 8 full buildings. They all have sub-buildings. There's a map in your packet which has them all numbered so that if someone is talking about a particular building, you have an idea of what that building is. There's packets on the blue table as well. So there's packets on the table that have photos of the complex, which are the same photos that are shown up here, but they're labeled with what building each picture is taken from. And then there's also a summary of the request for information process that we did, which I'll explain in a minute what that kind of means. And then in each of your packets, you have a bunch of different documents. You've got the front page is discussion prompts, which are things I just wrote to try to give everyone an idea of things to talk about and questions that we need to answer. You've got a press release that I wrote back in May, I believe, which was summarizing all of the work that we've really done on this project so far since the town has taken ownership of the property. And then you have a handout from Jessica from the Franklin Regional Council of Governments about what a brownfield is, and this property is a brownfield, and so it kind of goes into detail on what that actually means. And then there's I think the map is the next one. There's a map of all of the buildings with numbers. And then there's another map that has kind of an overlaid cul-de-sac drawn on it. That is a map that shows a proposed access road, which could then allow the property to be subdivided if we so choose. That map is how I picked the buildings that I wrote a grant application for selective demolition. So all of the grayed out or kind of cross-hatched buildings that you see on there are ones that I had written for, and we've received a grant for $600,000 to selectively demolish those buildings. We've now learned 2 years later that $600,000 is not going to cover that because costs keep increasing. So I've actually written a second grant application, which we will find the results of in October or November, to get more money for that same project. And we were kind of holding off on moving forward with that until we went through what we've been calling the request for information and request for proposal process, which is RFI and RFP. And those are tools that towns can use to gauge interest in a property or convey property. So there's kind of two avenues for getting rid of a property. You can auction it off to the highest bidder where you have no control over who is actually taking it as long as they have the money to give to you. That's often what towns do for a lot of properties. Some larger properties like this, you'll do a request for proposal process where you're asking not only for how much money are they going to give you, but what are their credentials, what is their plan for it. So you have a little bit more control over what's going to happen to this property. And so it allows the select board and through it them, the people who live in town, to have more input on what will actually be in their town in the future. It's a very involved process. An auction is very easy to do. You just have an auction and then it's gone. The RFP process, it usually takes several tries before you have a successful developer who is coming forward with a valid proposal. So that's what we tried to do over this past year. I worked with the select board and the town administrator, Brian, to do that process. We first completed a request for information to get an idea of what we should actually put into the request for proposals. So basically, we said, developers, tell us what you think you might want to do with this. Tell us what we should be potentially looking for. And so we got back 2 responses. And surprisingly, they were both from housing developers, which up until this point, we had not had any interest from. And so we have always kind of been going into this project assuming, based off of the conversations we've had, that it would be commercial or industrial use going forward. So it was a surprise to have housing developers look at this. And so they gave us some ideas of what they might do with this parcel. And we took that information, the select board took that information, and we worked on the request for proposals. And in that, you can have your criteria for how you're actually grading the proposals to make it fair so that you're not just going, oh, well, I know so-and-so, so we're going to give it to them. You're actually fairly grading across the board all the proposals that you get so that you can say, well, if we want 50 jobs out of this, are they proposing something that would give the town of Erving 50 jobs? Are they proposing something that would offer amenities to the public, or is this going to be a fully private use? Is it going to offer housing to Erving residents? And so the Board of Selectmen the Select Board, can pick what criteria is important for them to look at when they're reviewing these. When we put out the request for proposals, we did not get any responses, which was really disappointing, but not uncommon. Most towns that do this put these out multiple times before they get any responses, and it might be multiple times before they get responses that they actually like. So we're not alone in that. Montague has several mills that they're working on. Orange, all the towns around us that are old mill towns are dealing with this. But I think that we have a really special mill, and that hopefully something really cool could go in here in the future. With that, there's a whole bunch of questions that are in this discussion packet. I think that the most important ones are at the end. And in order to get to the ones at the end, you have to travel through all the other ones. And so you're probably going to start with kind of big picture, but also very specific ideas. I'm going to pick on Carrie because you said something the other day that I thought was really, it hit home. You were like, I want Chipotle. And, and I think we all drive by this building and we think, I can picture a Chipotle there, or I can picture a roller skating rink there, or these like very specific ideas. And unfortunately, the town doesn't have that much control over this. So we can't actually pick a certain, company that would go in here, but we can pick the uses that we all want to see. So if, Chipotle, for example, is a commercial use, and so we can kind of frame a request for proposals for that use. If that's what people want, they want stores, they want restaurants, they want, things like that, we can kind of frame an RFP to move that direction. And I know other people have voiced that they really want to see housing there, they want apartments. We can also kind of frame it that way. Maybe you want mixed use and you want both. So the conversations that I think I'm hoping will happen here are taking those ideas and going, kind of crafting the narrative to where we want to end up, and the tools that we have to kind of get to those places. Does that all make sense to everyone?
I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, so forgive me if I am.
The only addition I would make to that is that if we are to sell property, there's a very specific process that Mariah just reviewed. It's the same thing for leasing property. So we could maybe do multi-year contracts. We would still solicit proposals. So you still can't choose the specific business that's going to go into a specific space. You have to use a competitive process that's open to anybody in the public.
So the select board members, Brian and myself, will be joining groups and walking around and talking with you all. So if there's specific questions, then we'll be able to answer them then, or try to answer them and get back to you if we don't know the answer. I'm going to invite Jessica to come up and talk a little bit. She works for the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, who helps all of the towns in Franklin County do these kinds of projects and other economic development projects.
Thank you. For folks who aren't familiar, the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, we're the regional planning agency for Franklin County. We're also a regional and municipal service organization, so the town of Erving is a member of the Council of Governments. Predominantly, we've been involved on the brownfield side of this project, actually starting when there was a private investor or investment company out of California that owned it. The town invited us and asked us for assistance. And so in the handout, I have a list of some of the environmental site assessment activities that have happened, but that's going back to 2010 and 2011. Most recently was a hazardous building materials assessment, and that was basically looking at the contamination in the building. Is there contamination? What kind is it? How do you remediate it? And that was the information that was then used for the town to get a grant and a loan from Mass Development to actually remediate all of the contamination. And it was about $90,000 worth of assessment that was paid for through an EPA grant through our office. And in terms of what we do for economic development, we're here to help the town in any way we can. If it's facilitating, connecting to funding agencies at the state and federal level, if it's providing technical assistance, we're here to help in whatever way we can. So.
Thank you. All right. Unless anyone has anything else they'd like to say, I think we discuss. And I will check in about 10 or 15 minutes and let you all know that some time has passed. And if you'd like to change tables, you can. If you want to keep talking, you can. And hopefully we can make our way down this list and get to the bottom of some of this. Oh.
So as Mariah noted, you all have pads of paper on your tables. I'm going to ask you all if you wouldn't mind just appointing somebody to just be a note taker. They do not need to be long and complex. Bullet points are sufficient. We're just going to collect that as part of the record to put into the meeting minutes at the end. So if folks wouldn't mind doing that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
So hopefully all of you had really productive conversations and you solved all of the problems of Erving, and you know exactly what we're going to do with this building. But I know that it sounds like a lot of people were kind of going in order of the prompts. And so if you'd like to kind of report back in that order or just kind of general thoughts and ideas, I welcome you to kind of tell everyone what you've talked about, and I'll probably try to repeat it some so that folks at home will be able to hear kind of the summary of what folks have talked about. So I'm not going to call on anyone. I'm just going to rely on someone talkative to raise their hand like Jessica.
So for my group, the report out was, it was commented that it was helpful to have someone, to hear from someone with personal experience with old mill buildings and now how they've dealt with an old mill building over the years. It was pointed out, this is probably not wildly helpful, but the town is between a rock and a hard place, and we recognize that. Something needs to happen to move forward, and that's why we're here tonight. There was interest in outdoor recreation or public use for the site to attract people to the area, both visitors and maybe potentially residents. And just letting it sit for another 20 years is not an option. So.
Is there anybody else who'd like to come up and speak? Great. Jackie? All right, good.
So, is it on or no? It's on. Okay, all right. So our overall one is we felt that in the end we can't do anything. We have to do something. We can't just let it deteriorate. However, Deb and I both went there and we were surprised at the condition of the building. We expected it to be much worse. Especially because I had seen it like 5 or 6 years or more ago and expected it. And our biggest discussion was about like the RFP. So one of the questions that the prompt asked is, how could the select board be more advantageous when they were deciding to, to do the RFP again? And the question came up is, well, how do you do that? Because they're not familiar with what an RFP is. So it would be helpful to know exactly what the criteria was. And then Warren had mentioned, isn't there a way to send it out so you could do one, say, okay, you demolish a building, and what would you build in place there? Like, would the developer take the responsibility of demolishing all the buildings and then build something new that they could use? Could you issue an RFP for that? Something like a Walmart or a Target or a mixed-use type of thing. So that was one of the other suggestions. Nobody likes any building except Building 8 and Building 2. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. Everything else should be demolished if we have grant money. Instead of letting it get even in worse shape, those outlying buildings, we should get some of them demolished. But then the question came up is, when you're demolishing those buildings, is it creating even more issues once you get the demo done, and does that then make the remaining building, say it's Building 2, unstable? So that would be a consideration, because they are all kind of connected in a way. The idea is, no one liked the idea of using the tie-in bond road along the river, but to use the existing tunnel road. But again, that involves some demo, and that leads back to the question, well, if you demo some, do you make the building unstable? And let's see. We did talk a lot about the RFP. There was some thought that perhaps maybe we might want to create an economic development or a redevelopment authority and become, and redevelop the building ourselves. Just an avenue to explore. Not that we want to collect rent or anything, but it is possible for us to, create an economic development. It was an interesting idea. The idea to use the space as a municipal use was like, ooh, well, maybe that's a possibility. But then we'd have all the other buildings to get rid of that we just built. And I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Let's see. Everybody was pretty much in agreement that maybe you should take another stab at another RFP, though, because I believe that Charlene said, if you try again, we've learned something from this last time, maybe we'll get another developer interested in that time. Did I forget anything?
Thanks.
I'm not going to summarize what happened. If there's other things that the table wants to say, I'm just going to add something new. Because we also said RFP is the way to go. But we talked about what would be a unique use of this space that would make Erving an interesting attractor of people. And so we talked about the possible cutting edge kind of space where there's artisan spaces, where there's cultural interaction between people. It's not just a little store, but maybe it's a internet cafe that's connected to a bookseller that's connected. Somehow it's bringing in new ideas like sustainable architecture, like cultural interaction. And we talked about, well, how do you get that? You can't, exactly look for a developer who's going to meet those criteria. But one thing you could do is to have end users. Let's say there's a bookbinder and a bookseller and a cafe where you have a workspace. So these are things that are connected. If you have a bunch of end users, that really want to come to Erving to do this could be something that a developer would say, well, there's already people that want to come in here and do this kind of thing. So I think I'm summarizing some of what we said. Yeah.
I'm gonna call on the group in the back. You don't necessarily have to come up, but if you're comfortable with it.
Just making sure they didn't have anybody else. That's all.
So hi, folks. So we at the back table there, folks from public safety were very concerned about the building and have been for years. There was a lot of discussion about the money that has been spent through the years on different feasibility studies, and we unanimously at our group thought that the best route would be to demolish the entire complex.
I'll add that one of the ideas that I heard, absolutely, yes.
We also talked about, as Mark said, the consensus was to demolish. We spent enough money already. But to continue to use grants that allowed us to do that if we could, and if that was feasible, and we also talked about if that property was demolished, that we could use senior housing, might be a good location for senior housing, as well as a town hall, a municipal building that would replace what we already have that is way too small and has always been.
Yeah. All right. So just to summarize, unanimous on demolishing, and hopefully use grant funding as much as we can to do that, and that it could be useful for senior housing and maybe a municipal use like a town hall. One of the ideas I heard while I was over there too was we were talking about demolition, and so demolition money is really hard to come by in terms of grants. People don't generally like to pay for that. And so I had posed the question, if you want to demolish the whole thing and we can't find grant money to pay for it, do you think that people would be willing to pay out of pocket for that, or with bonds, or however we do that? And I know, Bill, you had the idea of kind of phasing that and kind of demolishing, starting from the back kind of, and demolishing frontwards, and after kind of a section of, a few buildings gets demolished, put out another RFP, see if anyone's interested, demolish some more, put out an RFP, see if anyone's interested, which I thought was an interesting idea. This middle table, is anyone interested in coming up or shouting out things that I can then repeat into the microphone? Is there anything new that you want to add that hasn't been said already?
Much of what's already been said, I think our table pretty much agreed with, although we didn't go quite so far as just tear everything down to make it a vacant lot just yet. We were in favor of using the grant money we have to selectively tear down the things that are structurally unsound and ought to be torn down, or the most likely to be torn down. And it's a tough decision of which buildings those are, but we think we should use the grant money for that. We do not think the town should just auction it off with no control over what anybody does. You run the risk, if you auction it off, they buy it, they do nothing for another 20 years, and then we've got it back. The people didn't pay the taxes, and the place is in worse shape than it is now. There's a whole bunch of different people sitting there 20 years from now having the same discussion. So we didn't want to auction the whole place off. We discussed affordable housing, which a lot of people don't understand. Affordable housing is something that most of us couldn't even afford. It's probably more than what our mortgage payments are. And there are people throughout the county that have no place to live. I mean, they just can't find an apartment. So if there's, I don't know, pick a number, 10 or 20, some reasonable amount, define reasonable, some amount of affordable housing developed, people might not object to that, but they probably don't want 60 or 80 housing units and change the whole character of the town. Let's see. Yep, just this is a thought we had. Picture that there never was a Yankee Candle. And today a guy comes and says, I'd like to have a Yankee Candle right there. It's not going to be Yankee Candle, but if there's a destination place that people will come from, they come from around the world to go to Yankee Candle. If there's a destination place that people will come to, if you can get that in an RFP or an RFI of interest, it might be helpful. Let's see, what else have we got here? I think that was almost, oh yeah, we thought subdividing the place would be a good idea. So there's if you got 50-something acres there, you've got whatever the appropriate acreage is that could be developed, set aside for the development, and the other side, which is the other amount of acreage, which is typically not very buildable anyways, could be saved for town use. So those are things we thought. Is that reasonably accurate, or?
The only thing on the affordable was the consensus that more information, education about what does that actually mean versus
Yeah.
perceived individually and what that means.
Correct. People have misunderstandings of what affordable is and what that would mean to the town. You know.
In regards to affordable housing in any town, how does Erving sit?
Not well.
Are you asking the amount of affordable housing that we have?
My question is, aren't there state regs about affordable housing in towns and municipalities?
So we're supposed to have 10% affordable housing by the state. We have 0.
Well, there's a need.
Yeah. One of the requests that I heard from one of the tables in the back was having updated cost information on full demolition or like most demolition except for say like building 2 or building 8, and to then have an idea of how a cost like that, a large cost like that, could actually affect the individual taxpayer. If the town was to pay outright for something like that, what would that actually mean for an individual's bill for the town? Which I think is something that out of all of the suggestions that we've heard today, that's a doable thing that we could do in the next few months. It may require us to hire the engineers and pay them some more money to do that. But I think as the select board is considering next steps, that is a next step that is easier than a lot of these other ones. Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea how much the town has spent on this over the 2 decades?
We had that number somewhere written down. Do you remember what it was?
It's approximately, we're in the $250,000 to $300,000 range.
Out of our pocket, plus grant money.
Right.
The labor and other investments the town's made. That is not as much as what has been spent.
$250,000.
Yeah, so for the folks back home, about $250,000 out of the town of Erving's pocket for that, not including labor or grants. One thing that Brian pointed out that I left off of the summary list was that we just put in a new pump station that, of course, I've been working on and somehow didn't recognize that I didn't include that. But the mill now has a brand new pump station that's ready for new development there. It's appropriately sized. Usually paper mill wastewater systems are very oversized for any other use because you have so much water flowing through there. And so now we have an appropriately sized one that we paid for with grant funding that is ready to go. Yes, sir.
So, Mariah, I think it's also important to understand when you're talking about money that's been spent on the building, that doesn't take into consideration hours that, law enforcement have been down there, fire department have been down there, highway's been down there. We go down there for 2 hours, and then you have somebody upset because we're not running radar on their road. So
Yeah.
that you can't even put a dollar on.
Yeah.
That happens more often than I think what the people in this town realize.
Yes, so there's a lot of law enforcement and DPW hours that are spent down there dealing with different situations.
Insurance costs in that number accordingly?
Yeah, I mean, around in there, if folks would like a firm number, I'm happy to do them out again. So if you have
We had it broken out somewhere, but yeah, we can pull that out for like if we do a summary of this.
It's a general idea.
Yeah.
What's it costing the town?
Right. Well, and when we do, I think we'll probably write up all the notes that Brian is taking, and we'll take whatever notes you all want to pass along, and we'll do kind of a summary of what we've taken out of these conversations, and we can include more detailed information like that, what we've spent, anything else that you're all requesting. If there's any documents that you all would like to have access to that you couldn't find online, we can try to find those and get them to you. One thing that Brian and I had discussed was on the website there's an e-updates or e-alerts page where you can sign up to get alerted when there's different updates on different topics. We're going to create an IPMO one. My hope is to add everyone here to that. If there's anyone who does not want to be added to that, let me know and I will keep you off the list. But I have everyone's email from the sign-up sheet, and that way people can get, whenever we post an update of either another conversation or a new grant opportunity or something like that, we can just automatically update people who are already interested in the topic. So yeah, please find me after this. If you're not interested in being on it, I don't want to force you to, but I do want to make sure that anyone who is interested and engaged in this can stay that way. Yes.
Was using almost using Eastworks as a sample. Like it's been very successful in East Hampton. Not granted, it's a different demographic, but mixing more or less like the commercial, the office space, and the residential housing within the same building.
Mm-hmm.
That was just something that
Yeah, so using Eastworks as kind of inspiration for this, of having mixed use that seems to be working out well.
Right.
Yeah.
And we talked about the Orange Innovation Center as also an inspiration.
Yeah, the Orange Innovation Center is a very local, inspirational redevelopment. Yes.
Well, we would, the RFP, like the criteria that the selectmen use, if you can have a little more detail on that, understand it a little bit better.
So I could post the RFP PDF to the same IPMail page, and I can just put on it that it's expired, obviously, but we could include that as a document that people can refer to.
Well, it's the criteria that you were using to grade it.
That's all included. Yep. Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, one of the things we were talking about too is turnstiles, town next door. Also have had trouble for many years trying to develop some of their mills. It is great to hear that there are some encouraging things, Holyoke, we're talking about Flats, East Hampton, but it's a problem for pretty much every town. And the success stories are further between. One thing I'd also like to add to it, I've heard a couple of folks mention education on the idea of what affordable housing is. also there needs to be an education about municipal finance. And, any housing is an absolute net loss to the town in tax dollars when compared to just the basics of schools. And I truly don't think most folks understand that. So I think if we're educating about that, there should be an action.
We can do a kind of a broad education.
I also think I have already felt that anybody that speaks against that affordable housing, what we look at is you don't understand it, or you're not empathetic when there's a real financial issue.
So a concern around the financing around residential uses, and also just a broader need for education around how municipal finance works.
Yeah, certainly with taxes. I mean, some of the meetings I went to, and even the town meeting, the big push was the idea that we have to enlarge our tax base. You can't enlarge your tax base when a company is not for profit. They're not taxed. And if a single-family home is built, that's going to be a net loss for the town of Erving over many, many, many years. You might get $2,000 in taxes for 1 year, but it's $25,000 a year that you get a student, and she's never reaches out.
Yes, sir.
One point I'd like to encourage folks to consider is the big picture. It's easy to get lost in this argument about what to do about this building. But if you, as I said earlier, if you go up 300 feet in the sky, be careful of the high tension wires while you're doing it, and you look down and ask the question, what is the most valuable resource I'm looking at right now? It's not the mill. It's the river and the land along the river. And if somehow, some way, the town could work towards maximizing the value of that 40 acres, 40 plus acres, I think that would be the best use of that piece of land. And then the mill becomes part of that. Instead of the mill being the whole, I mean, I know the mill is important and it's the focus right now, it's the point we're here, but it's really a small part of a bigger picture.
So you're talking about taking into account that the land is equally, if not more valuable than the actual complex, and that should be taken into
I would
account.
argue much more valuable.
Okay.
That river, the view of that river, in my opinion, is something that should be shared. How many of us have seen the river? Yeah? But by and large, most people in this town and in Franklin County have never seen the Miller's River behind the mill. And what a piece of property that is. And what potential there is there. Now, as Mr. Jean-Louis points out, how are you going to make it work financially? That's the big question.
Yeah.
And I think people, to your point, sir, I think you're absolutely right. And to your point, I think people would see that piece of property if the mill wasn't on.
That mill went up in 1902. It was put up by Daniel O'Connell from Holyoke. O'Connell and Sons. And the Mackin family was involved in that also. Before that, you can see the river.
Thank you. Yeah, so focusing on the Miller's River and the beauty of it, and then as well as the financial ability of whatever that includes. Does anyone have any kind of closing thoughts before we leave or continue to mingle? I don't know, does the select board feel like there's any outstanding kind of questions or comments or things that we need to bring together?
I would just like to see something that when we talk about how to pay for this, as we talk about how we pay for anything that we, any services or any improvements we do in the town of Erving, that we put forward all of the, that we think out of the box, and that it's not just how we're going to pay for it through taxes. Are we going to use bonding? Are we going to borrow? That the community has all of that of what it entails to do that, and what the cost is, and what it means to the community as a whole. financially, as they think about how they continue through the process of improving or taking property.
So being creative about how we might finance projects, and then also doing education and explanation, kind of like Mark was saying, on how does municipal finance work, and then also how do these different options work and what do they actually mean? Okay. Other select board thoughts? You good? All right. I turn it over to you.
I'll just say thank you all for joining us tonight, for making the time to come out, for those who could make the walkthrough as well. Thank you for joining us for that, bringing your ideas. Hopefully you've given the board a lot to work with. I think what I've heard, gives us some things to work on. Hopefully we can further this in a way that we come to some plan that all of us and the voters can at least accept as the best of this situation, because obviously we do have to do something about it. I agree. So just want to thank you all again, and this is probably one of many to come. We'll hopefully put together some answers and some further information, sessions, etc., and we'll continue to hopefully see all of you at those future sessions and others. So thank you. With that, I will, is there a motion to adjourn? And a second? All those in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Good to see you, Ed. Good to see you. Good to see you, folks.